What if I told you that the deadliest disaster in human history was invisible to the naked eye? Yes, you heard it right, a catastrophe so profound that its impact reverberates even after decades. It's the Chernobyl disaster we're talking about, a calamity that unfolded in the quiet early morning hours of April 26, 1986. Now let's take a step back. To truly grasp the magnitude of this disaster, we need to comprehend the concept of nuclear power. Picture this: nuclear power is like a wild stallion, incredibly powerful yet potentially dangerous if not properly harnessed. It's a fine balance between harnessing this power and preventing it from spiraling out of control. Diving into the heart of this power source, we find the nuclear reactor, a complex piece of engineering designed to control a nuclear chain reaction. However, like any piece of technology, it's not immune to flaws. And it was one such flaw in the design of the Chernobyl reactor that lit the fuse to this disaster. Now imagine a car with a faulty brake system. You're cruising down the highway, unaware of the impending danger. Suddenly you need to stop, but the brakes fail, and a crash becomes inevitable. This is essentially what happened at Chernobyl. The reactor's safety systems, designed to halt the nuclear chain reaction, akin to the brakes in our car analogy, tragically failed. But it wasn't just the design that was flawed, human error played its part too. A series of poor decisions and shortcuts taken in the name of efficiency only served to amplify the impending disaster. It was a perfect storm of flawed design, engineering errors, and ethical dilemmas. As we dive deep into the Chernobyl disaster, remember this: the most dangerous enemy is the one you can't see. For the people of Chernobyl, this enemy was not a foreign invader but an unseen force lurking within their own city, a force that would change their lives and the world forever. April 26, 1986, a date that will forever be etched in history. But what led to this catastrophic day? In the heart of the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was a symbol of progress and technological prowess. Yet beneath the surface, a series of flawed decisions, engineering errors, and ethical dilemmas were setting the stage for disaster. The reactor number 4, had a design flaw. Unlike other designs, it became unstable at low power levels, a ticking time bomb hidden within the concrete and steel. But this wasn't a secret. Engineers knew about the design flaw, but the pressure to keep the reactor operational overshadowed the need for safety. The Soviet officials, hungry for power and blind to the risks, chose to ignore the warnings. The Chernobyl catastrophe wasn't just a result of a flawed design, but also a failure of human judgment. Plant operators, under pressure from their superiors, were forced to navigate the treacherous waters of a failing system. They were caught in a web of ethical dilemmas, forced to choose between their duty to their superiors and their responsibility to the public safety. In the wee hours of April 26th, plant operators were conducting a safety test. The test was intended to determine how the reactor would operate during a power outage. Ironically, this test meant to ensure safety was the spark that ignited the disaster. The reactor was brought to a dangerously low power level, setting off a chain of events that led to an uncontrollable power surge. In the end, it wasn't just the design flaw or the engineering errors that caused the Chernobyl catastrophe. It was also the disregard for safety, the unethical decisions, and the pressure to keep the reactor running at all costs. Ironically, it was a safety test that led to one of the greatest industrial accidents of our time. In the early hours of April 26th, the world was oblivious to the impending disaster. In the heart of Ukraine, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was humming along, its reactor 4 at full power. But deep within its core, a deadly concoction of heat and pressure was brewing. The plant's operators, oblivious to the ticking time bomb within, made a fatal decision. They initiated a safety test, a procedure that ironically would lead to one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. An explosion erupted, its force equivalent to 500 Hiroshima bombs. The reactor's roof was blown away, spewing a cloud of radioactive particles into the atmosphere. It was a silent, invisible killer, spreading across the Soviet Union, Europe, and eventually, the entire northern hemisphere. As the sun rose, the city of Pripyat, home to the plant's workers and their families, stirred in confusion. A toxic cloud was descending upon them, but there were no sirens, no warnings. The Soviet government, in a desperate attempt to control the narrative, delayed announcing the disaster. 2 days later, the evacuation began. Buses lined the streets of Pripyat, their engines humming ominously. Over the loudspeakers, a chilling message echoed, "Attention, attention, dear comrades, leave your homes immediately." The people were given just a few hours to gather their belongings. They were told it was a temporary measure that they would return in 3 days, but Pripyat was never to be inhabited again. The city, once bustling with life, was left to decay, its silent streets and abandoned buildings a haunting testament to the catastrophe. The Soviet officials' delayed response had allowed the invisible enemy to take hold, turning a thriving city into a no-man's land. In the blink of an eye, Chernobyl had become a ghost town. The day the earth shook was a day that would forever be etched in the annals of history, a stark reminder of the devastating power of nuclear energy when left unchecked. The explosion was over, but the disaster was just beginning. As the dust settled, the scale of the catastrophe started to become clear. The Chernobyl incident wasn't just a single event, but a chain reaction with long-term effects that are still felt today. The invisible enemy of radiation was unleashed, seeping into the air, the soil and the water, turning Chernobyl into a lethal landscape. The brave and unfortunate souls who worked tirelessly to clean up the disaster site are known as the liquidators. These men and women were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation, leading to countless cases of acute radiation sickness and other health complications. The World Health Organization estimates that around 4,000 deaths can be directly attributed to the disaster, but the true toll on the liquidators and those exposed to the fallout may never be fully known. The impact on the residents of nearby towns was equally devastating. Thousands were forced to evacuate, leaving behind their homes, their possessions, their lives. They were the collateral damage in this catastrophe, their health and their futures forever marked by the invisible specter of radiation. The environmental damage was, and continues to be, profound. Forests turned red, a chilling reminder of the radiation that suffused the area. Animals and plants were affected, with mutations and abnormalities becoming common. The land around Chernobyl became a haunting testament to the destructive power of nuclear energy when things go wrong. Efforts to contain the radiation began almost immediately after the disaster. The new safe confinement structure, a massive steel dome, was built to encase the reactor and prevent further leakage of radioactive material. The construction of this monumental structure was an engineering feat in itself, a symbol of humanity's resolve to rectify its mistakes. Yet, despite all these efforts, the legacy of Chernobyl endures. The area remains largely uninhabitable, a ghost town stuck in time, a stark reminder of the disaster that unfolded here. The radiation, though lessened, still lingers, a silent, unseen threat. The ghost of Chernobyl still haunts us, even after all these years. Chernobyl was a tragedy of epic proportions, but what can we learn from it? The disaster at Chernobyl was an event that forever changed the world's perception of nuclear power. But from this catastrophe we've gleaned lessons that have shaped the future of nuclear safety and policy. One of the key takeaways from Chernobyl is the crucial importance of rigorous safety standards and regulations in nuclear power plants. Prior to the disaster, safety measures were often overlooked or given less priority due to economic or political pressures. The disaster underscored the necessity of stringent safety protocols that could withstand worst-case scenarios. Today, nuclear power plants around the world are held to far stricter standards, ensuring that a disaster on the scale of Chernobyl is less likely to occur. Transparency, too, is a lesson learned from Chernobyl. In the aftermath of the disaster, the Soviet government was heavily criticized for its lack of transparency and slow response. This lack of information exacerbated the effects of the disaster, leading to unnecessary exposure and panic. In the years since, there has been a global shift towards open communication in times of crisis, emphasizing the need for timely, accurate information to protect public safety. And lastly, Chernobyl forced us to confront the ethical considerations in engineering and decision-making. The disaster was a stark reminder that human lives are at stake when it comes to the operation of nuclear power plants. It highlighted the duty of care that engineers, operators, and policymakers have to ensure the safety of those who live in the shadow of these facilities. This has led to a greater emphasis on ethical considerations in engineering, with a focus on prioritizing human safety above all else. The Chernobyl disaster is a stark reminder of the devastating power of nuclear energy when it goes awry, but in its wake, it has also taught us valuable lessons in responsibility, transparency, and the importance of putting safety first.